Welcome back again to part 3 of my memorable games. Interestingly enough, I left out the part that I managed to win or tie for first in the previous event, the Foxwoods Open, which was held over Easter weekend in 2000. Thank you. And for the most part, we were very lucky to tie for first. There is a fellow who caught up with me in second place. I will put the link to that cross table in the part 2 show description for the video on demand. The player that caught up to me with 6 points out of 7 as I drew my last round game in short order with a Caro-Kann, or the threat of a Caro-Kann, as the case pointed out. The person who tied with me was very upset that he could only tie with me because he really did want to play me, and he insisted that he knew that he would beat me this time because I had apparently played him in a World Open amateur team event and I made him look like a total beginner, and he began to recount the entire game. And obviously he had refreshed his memory because I think he was looking my games up during the event in an anxious hope that we would have a chance for an encounter. But I had to look this game up later, and I did indeed positionally dominate him and smash him to bits with the help of a weakness on c7 in that game, with rooks on the c file and everything. So perhaps we'll see that game again later. Today, however, we're going to be looking at the World Open 2000. July 4th weekend, shortly after the Easter weekend of 2000, when I tied for first in the Foxwoods Open. Now, this wasn't a particularly stunning tournament for me. It was actually the tournament I was playing Foxwoods to prepare for, because the prize money is even larger in the World Open. There's a $10,000 first prize, not a $6,000 first prize. As it turned out, in Foxwoods, I had to split $6,000 first and $3,000 second. C'est la vie, for $4,500 each, which, of course, was nice enough to start off my year 2000 post my layoff as a programmer in the Y2K era. I had spent most of the days leading up to that year end debugging code, testing programs, running all sorts of simulations on trade entry and so forth, because I was working at the time for Royce and Associates, which was later bought out by Charles Schwab Investments. However, as much as I loved working for Royce and Associates, I loved my life as a professional chess player and chess coach and teacher at the same time as well in the year 2000, as I fully embraced my new lifestyle, and I have since never really looked back. Here we are. In this particular game, I played a line, one of my favorite lines against the French defense against Arthur Traldi in this World Open, that was inspired by the Chris Baker book, A Startling Chess Opening Repertoire for White. Now, interestingly enough, this line is not that good. However, if you look in the French defense, I believe there's a two-part book series by Byron Jacobs and perhaps another author by Everyman, the French defense classical variation and the French defense winnower. They're two very thin books. I believe there are 11 games in that book where white wins or draws 10 of them. And there's only one loss in that particular book, and that is to French defense expert Justin Sarkar. And as it turns out, when I was away traveling, I can't remember where I was at the time, but my former roommate and best friend, Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, had seen me win this game, among others, and he was so taken aback by how easy I made it look that he decided to give this particular opening a whirl, and his game is in that Everyman book as the only loss for the white pieces, unfortunately, as it turns out. It's rather crazy. But C'est la vie, what can you do? I also found in the Flexible French by Moskalenko, there are some new ideas in these variations with castling queenside. We can look at this line here for the most part. Now the essence of this is actually, this is a classical French defense with knight c3 on the third move, knight f6, e5, knight on f to d7. And in this particular example, after c5, in the Steinitz variation, Steinitz captures on c5. Now my opponent plays appropriately. He plays knight to c6, putting pressure on e5. So bishop f4 anchors the pawn on e5. And as I said before, there's some new theory in this line where we might move our queen up, castle queenside, play h4, h5, and go after the opponent's king. And that is in this particular line, which I didn't employ here. Instead, I didn't castle at all, and I ended up in a world of trouble, hurt, and anxiety and stress up the wazoo. So here we are. Bishop takes c5, bishop d3, and at many points in my career, my opponents have fallen for the attack on f2 and b2, because if you are only looking at tactics books instead of strategy books, or let's just say being a good chess player, you must get your pieces out. My opponent chooses the proper move, f6. However, many young players and many of my students' opponents have played the move queen to b6, and after castles have gotten their queen trapped with the move knight to b5. I will let you look into this further, but the possibilities are endless, and it is quite a lovely line to play, and I expect a certain amount of popularity in this line at the lower level. And it is part of Chris Baker's recommendations and suggestions in the book, A Startling Chess Opening Repertoire for White. I Am Chris Baker came out with the second edition, which I highly recommend. It is a complete opening repertoire for White with one e4, and it is extremely solid. I only disagree with the Koltanowski Gambit in the opening chapters. I would prefer that you play the Scotch Gambit and supplement your knowledge with a simple chess opening repertoire by Sam Collins, or supplement your Scotch Gambit with a great book very well structured and very well written by Grandmaster Alex Fishbein. So in this particular instance, oh no, the sound on this is going to be absolutely horrid, isn't it? I'm going to have to redo both of these. I can actually anticipate this now. I should probably abort this mission as we speak, but I'm going to carry on and cross my fingers that the sound has been fixed with the earbud. Needless to say, I've learned my lesson. Perhaps no music is better than badly pronounced music. So my opponent plays the proper move f6, and of course we have to give up in more than one way. Both knight takes f6 and queen takes f6 lead to the same, slightly better for white, microscopically slightly better, but more or less equal chances for both sides opening. The thing that I like about this particular game, or this particular opening, is the fact that black has 3 pawn islands, 2, 2, and 2, while white has 2 pawn islands. And I am a big fan of the endgame. Basically, you don't have to be absolutely the #1 endgame player that you think you have to be. You only have to be a better endgame player than your opponent. That is the key. Even if you are not the most exemplary endgame player in the room, you must be the better endgame player at your board. And that is what you should constantly strive for in each and every encounter. Try to follow Bobby Fischer's recipe, as well as every other professional player or grandmaster's recipe. Try to only go into openings where the chances are with you in the endgame. These chances may be to draw if you're at a slightly worse endgame, or these chances might be to win the game, and that is optimally what we wish to do. Now, this particular game is one which I actually was, I submitted my first time ever on AK Nemsko's channel for Flex Friday. I've been watching Flex Friday for weeks, perhaps if not months at a time, because I didn't catch every Flex Friday, of course, but in her channel, she awards a cash prize to the best flex and half of the $50 prize, $25 prize to the best fail. And I highly recommend you check out her Flex Fridays as a as either a sub or a follower. She does an amazing job with that. In any event, the link here, if you have not yet followed AK Nemsko's channel, is there. And I also want to thank Chess Informant for providing me with all of the help needed to improve this stream with Chess Informant publications and instructional books, which we will also review on stream in short YouTube videos. So now that those two ads are over for AK Nemsko and Chess Informant, I'd like to bring you back to the fact that studying chess requires you to see the complete picture in a game. In other words, it's not the opening that wins the game much of the time. You can have the best position out of the opening and still blow it. Your strategic planning, decision-making, calculation, objective assessments, and confidence and character need to be well set in the middle game in order for you to take care of business. So in this particular example, so far we've been playing the main line of the two knights variation / classical Steinitz, French defense. And our opponent, of course, follows in the footsteps of many a grandmaster with the move Queen F7. Now I have to choose from several different continuations. Like I said before, there is an opportunity here for white to play queen to e2 and castle queenside. And of course, in these particular examples, if black, of course, gives us an opportunity, we are going to go for it. They should create counterplay on this side of the board. We can apply pressure in the center. If they are to, let's say, relocate their knight to the center, then we have another opportunity perhaps to tuck away our king and in the near future start playing for an attack on the king side or against the weak two hanging pawns in the center. A lot of different choices here. See Victor Moskalenko's book on the flexible French if you'd like to see the plans for white in this particular position in detail. However, I should check out Anish Giri's French defense chessable course as well to see what he recommends as black in these variations. I'm not sure if he recommends the winner though, then none of this knowledge is necessary, but you do have to know what to do against the two knights variation. Black in this position could also choose to castle. And I'm sorry, after white castles, black could castle. And we have a very normal position after bishop h4, which we reach or should reach in the game. However, you know that my mind is racing in this particular position because I want to have the best world open possible. The dollar signs are still fluttering before my very eyes. And my opponent eschews any normal development here. Perhaps to punish me for my king not being out of the center, and he chooses to play knight on d to e5. Now this is okay by me, as after knight takes e5, knight takes e5, all is good. Bishop to b5 check, and then suddenly I'm a little bit worried about my position. I mean, I should just castle or play bishop g3. Bishop g3 is the most logical move. After all, if my opponent castles, my opponent captures on d3, I can recapture and then castle queenside, and I'll be more than happy to play this endgame against these two pawns in the center. However, this check was just a little bit hasty. There's no reason for me to seek the weakening of these pawns just yet. My idea was twofold. First, I wanted to remove the defender of the e6 pawn, and I also wished to tackle the open e file with the backward e pawn on it. So I chose queen to e2. Now this plan isn't really working out for me, and I really don't have any advantage whatsoever. But after my opponent's king castles, I went nuts, unfortunately. It would be very logical for me to play a sane move like queen takes e5. I apologize. It would be very logical for me to play a sane move like bishop takes d7, or just simply to castle. But as it turns out, I played what I felt was a rather insane idea, and that was to leave my king in the center. And I'm going to have to rough it. I'm really going to have to rough it. As it turns out, Stockfish approves of all of these moves. Queen takes g2, rook to e1. After all, is my king safe? Am I happy that my rook on a1 is out of the game? Not really. However, black does have two very pronounced weaknesses in the center that I can attack. So, my opponent has a choice of several options here. Bishop takes b5 being amazingly enough the simplest and best option. But that is a hard move to find. Had he found bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, did I have time? Sorry, my opponent played rook f2. Did I have time to play queen takes e6 check? I'm not so sure I need the open center files, center lines against my queen, let alone anything else. Therefore, after knight takes b5, the game would be roughly equal with me having a piece for 3 pawns. Very strange looking pawns. Actually, I only have a piece for 2 pawns, but I felt like the compensation was worth it in the terms of activity of my queen, rook, and knight. But my opponent, on the other hand, plays rook to f2, and I have no choice but to try to start consolidating. I would like to get rid of the rooks, right? Unfortunately, I chose the wrong method of consolidating. I should have just chosen bishop to d3, where I'm a little bit better in this position. Not quite as significant an advantage that I wanted, but my opponent certainly has 3 pawns for the piece, and pressure on my king. My rook on a1 is out of the game. Not sure how happy I can be. Practically, this game is very difficult to play. But since I played rook to f2, rook to e2, I end up once again in a 2 minor piece versus rook endgame, as we saw in part 2. Only this time I happen to be on the other side of the position, where the e6 pawn is falling, my opponent is grabbing material, I am trying to assert myself as best I can and make his king the less safe of the 2. Now, interestingly enough, objectively, this was the best move. Crazy enough, this move won the game for me, even though Stockfish gives it a question mark. Remember, chess is a game played between 2 people. And in this particular example, my opponent is human. He gives me a check, and then he tries to bring his queen back to consolidate. But there is a win for white in this position, very simply. And I missed it. Fortunately for me, in the Flex Friday, Chiu Zhao, aka Nemsko, glossed over the game for the greater whole and the greater good, and I enjoyed her presentation of the game. I did show it on my stream at some point or another. Perhaps I showed it on Saturday morning, I believe, the Saturday morning broadcast, August 14th. So whatever broadcast was August 14th, I'm trying to remember whose birthday it was. you may catch it there. Here, however, if you've not already found the winning continuation, you should pause the stream and take a couple of moments and work out the move that I missed. And it wasn't really the move that I missed, but more than one move that I missed. I missed the ideal follow-up to the placement of my pieces, which was pointed out immediately afterwards by Grandmaster Joel Benjamin. Like, dude, why didn't you just play this? And I'm like, of course, that's what I should play. However, it is move number 26. I have a very strategic goal. I am a strategic player. I am not an overtly analytical, calculation-based, tactical player. I am an intuitive player, not unlike Tall, right? I will be dynamic, but I will be intuitively dynamic. If you've not yet unpaused the video, I will let you know that this timer above me does indeed work. And I will stop that timer for the most part and let you know that the winning move that I missed was not really just knight to g6 check, but the simple retreating move, because I was not a retreater move, a retreating player, queen to g3, and there is no stopping with checkmate along the h file. Black has to resign here for the most part. I honestly can't picture what he's going to do other than giving up his queen to avoid the mate. And at this point, it will be merely a matter of picking up the pawns and enjoying myself. In the game continuation, however, after my opponent retreated his queen, which I felt was the logical next step, I went about my business in a completely clear-cut strategic manner, because I saw almost everything very, very clearly and strategically. I was going to outpost my knight on the 6th rank. I was going to capture this pawn on d5, anchor the bishop, and create threats to the king, and perhaps push both of these pawns, as well as this candidate pass pawn through to become a queen. And much of that does take place in the game. So queen to d4 was the rather unfortunate move and hasty move that I played instead of the winning move knight to g6. My opponent pins my knight, so we have to seek some safety. King to c2. Everything is covered, but of course my opponent cannot really capture any of the material. His rook is dominated by both the knight and the bishop. I have to be very careful here that I don't lose any material. I won't be able to safeguard the bishop, so I have to anchor something. Now there's an even better move here than the move that I played. If you want to take a moment, pause the video to look for it. Try to choose 3 candidate moves for white. The reason that you're looking for 3 candidate moves for white is objectively, if you want to match wits with any strong player, you're looking for a good move. Hopefully you'll see the good move and a better move. Perhaps you might even see the good move, a better move, and the best move in the position. And I trust in everyone's faith to be able to do that. After having let this thing sit for the 2, or not quite 2 minutes that I've been talking, guess what? Although the Stockfish gave my move a dubious before, it has now risen to the best move in the position. My move is now the best move in the position, which is quite crazy. And of course, the annotation says h3 was best. But this is not clear at all. As the second best move, when the analysis engine has run its task, the second best move is queen to e5, perhaps with the idea of just unpinning the knight and putting pressure on everything that black owns. However, instead, c4 is deemed to be the best after minutes of thinking. I do find the move h3, try to anchor the pawn. I'm protecting all of my material in the most solid way possible, and the knight is covering all the possible checks, as well as the bishop. Queen f5 check is all he can do. I just need to find some safety for my king. Anchor my knight. I'm not ready to trade queens just yet, although I think that was okay. I really don't want his rook to be coming into the game, so I have to create all sorts of mating threats against both the back rank and the g7 square. So we're keeping the rook in a purely defensive pattern. And I'm, as I said before, looking for the safest possible square for my opponent. I'm trying to weaken his kingside pawns, and I'm succeeding in almost all of those fronts. Queen to h3 is a natural move, because now I'm considering the exchange of queens, as I can see very clearly the creation of a passed pawn. And touchdown. Let's see how well that goes. King to a2, do not hurry. Number one endgame principle, do not hurry. And in this particular example, I'm doing a great job of that. I'm pacing myself and I'm making the time control. It's move number 38. And it is time. It is time to try to make some progress. Knight to g5. Already I can see my way through to the back rank. Black stopped me from reaching the back rank. And now I try to drill my way through to the back rank with the help of an attack on the rook. So he covers all of his bases. Now my queen and minor pieces are far more active against his very weak and open king. I just have to find the right way in. Now, of course, I could have probably found the right way in with further threats of trying to reach h6, but I chose to move bishop to d6 for a very specific reason. I wanted to drive the rook off of the c8 square and reach the 7th rank with my queen, with a very small but poignant threat on h7. Queen to e7, but remember, all of his pieces are very passive, so I do not want to hurry in the realization of my advantage. I'm going to keep massaging him, weakening him, tiring him out, getting him to despair, get him to despair and be despondent as much as I can. He plays a6, which I found rather peculiar, but what to do? He's trying to weaken my king and open another file which he can use for his rook. I don't blame him. Suddenly, I have an opportunity and I don't waste it. His king is completely surrounded in a mating net. Therefore, he cannot capture this pawn on c5. Even if he were to try to even think about capturing the pawn, I can simply just push the pawn because of the weakness of the back rank. So, as it turns out, we're moving forward here with our passed pawn. And by the time this pawn reaches very close to the other side, I finally have to do some damage control. My opponent, once again, as it turns out, is forcing me to not hurry. I mean, I could have just played queen takes b2. As pointed out by good friend FIDE Master and potentially I am elect Donnie Ariel. Donnie Ariel pointed this winning idea out to me. He's like, why didn't you just take the pawn immediately? And I'm like, I have no answer to this except for the fact that I am a firm believer in the do not hurry principle. If I can wait one move, I will. Therefore, after the move queen e5, only now do I capture on b2. Queen takes b2, king takes b2, rook to c8. And I have one more extremely clever move coming. Bishop e8. Bishop e8 is the move that takes care of business, of course. If my bishop is captured, then I get to blockade the passed pawn, and he has one check. Now I just have to be careful not to leave the c file with my king until he runs out of checks, because at this moment he has no more checks lest his rook get captured. So as it turns out, in this particular position, bishop to e8, I had already foreseen it well in advance of reaching this position as an intuitive endgame player, I felt very comfortable here. Now, did he really need to play king to h6? He could have played g5 right away and decoyed my material. I would not have captured. I would have done exactly as happens in the game. I would have captured on b5, and only after my knight is decoyed, I would have scurried across to the king side of the board and done everything in my power to blockade these pawns. Now note that he doesn't really want to push this pawn and not allow himself the ability to try to escort it in. He really needs to be able to escort that pawn in with the help of a king on at least G1. So we're getting closer. And there are some mating threats in here that I'm really enjoying as well, to a certain extent. I just have to let him know how much I'm going to enjoy mating. For example, he can't step away from the pawn here in order to promote it, but obviously I could even give that one to him, and if he did wish to move the pawn, it's checkmate. So I actually saw many of these things arising. I entertained the thought of letting him self-mate himself, but he is a good player. Arthur Traldi was no slouch. I did get the opportunity to play him more than once. I believe the other game was a draw, and I am desperately trying to give him the opportunity to checkmate himself. After all, this is that second opportunity to checkmate himself. He's not doing so, however. He's going to play king h2. Finally, I give up, and I start to go about the business of winning his pawns, luring him into putting the pawn on h2, walking across, and with this, the 78th move, I begin my track to checkmating him. And at this point, the room was fairly clear. There were only a handful of spectators, which would soon grow into about 15 or 20 spectators, all watching me handle this bishop and knight endgame, which I completely enjoyed. Note that my opponent is trying to go into the wrong corner. The wrong corner is absolutely essential. I must drive him to that corner because I need to checkmate him with the bishop. There are many bishop and knight tutorials out there that show you how to checkmate with a bishop and a knight, usually with a very convoluted stockfish infused method, which involves a waiting move with the bishop, then a check with the bishop, then checkmate with the knight. But I only know one way. I do know the other way, but I only know one way to do this in a hurry, and that is the old-fashioned way with the W. Basically, the knight starts on f7, goes to e5, to d7, to c5, and ultimately, not necessarily to b7, but to h6. I think he actually does go to b7 in this game. Knight to e5. The first leg of the W is complete as we farm our opponent to the side of the board. They check to drive him across. Notice the wall. And he has no way in. Note the wall again. So I bring my king back. If he goes into the corner, I'll be very happy to lock him in. However, I didn't need to check in this direction. I could have also played the ending of the W on this side, driving him across, and this would have been perhaps a move or two faster. Whoops. Need to make sure he doesn't get out. And then after knight to c5, a waiting move. Oh, this is the waiting move, isn't it? No, it's not. How do I do the waiting move? Oh, this is the waiting move. This is the convoluted way. They do this bit where they check and they checkmate with the knight, which I've never learned. As I just demonstrated it, I have never learned that method. The method I have learned is the very simple and straightforward way of checkmating him. Using the knight, I should have played knight to b7 check. However, I chose this very interesting method, which might even be faster. and a waiting move, and then we cut him off, and then we give him a check, and a mate. Now, of course, this method took 105 moves. The method that I showed you before with the checkmate with the knight took 106 moves. So it's all relative to the position. However, knowing the bishop and knight mate is not that hard. It's really not that hard. First, you need to know the basic concept. The hardest possible part of this particular bishop and knight checkmate is if the opponent ran for it. This is where I usually see, instead of an opponent running back in this direction, they try to get away. And by trying to get away, it looks as though they're getting away, but you can actually rope them in with the help of your bishop. And you have two ways. I believe that this way is faster, giving them fewer squares to choose from. And you just have to wait. And once again, we're finishing the W, moving the king into the corner. Did he think that he can escape? He cannot. All we need is the waiting move. This is the method that I've always known from the days of basic chess endings and Paul Keres' practical chess endgames. If you wish to study a very practical manual on chess endgames, there's an algebraic edition of Paul Keres, K-E-R-E-S, Endgame Manual, Practical Chess Endings, that you can read anywhere and absorb at any time in the comfort of your own home or on your commute. Thanks to everyone once again. I appreciate you for being here. Yeetenheimers. Namaste. Vanakan, namaste. As we head out, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do part 4, as Tuesday is Society Team Billiards Team 9-ball Billiards Night, 21st and Broadway. If you are in Manhattan, that is the place to be if you want to play pool. Needless to say, I want to thank Chess Informant, my viewers, Yeetenheimers, Ishmael, Mad Quick Chess. Give Mad Quick Chess a quick shout out there. Mad Quick Chess, relatively or semi-retired variety streamer. Paul 1E4, Case Money, all of you have been watching. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to send this one over to, or back to, one of my favorite streamers, the Chess Bay. I have to say, he is the Chess Bay. Very kind-hearted soul, very earnest about improving at chess. Not the Chess Bay of pre-COVID days. That was just Chess Bay. This is the Chess Bay. Enjoy. Thank you so much, everyone. Ciao and hasta la vista.